In the shadowed underbelly of a crumbling Louisiana courthouse, forgotten ledgers whispered a sin that heaven itself seemed to curse. Enslaved souls etched with the gilded surnames of their tormentors, names that echoed through marble halls of power, now stained with the blood of betrayal. What divine fury birthed such twisted legacies? Feel the chill of judgment creeping through the Bayou mist, as ghosts of guilt rise to claim their due. The year was 1998, and the air in St. Martin Parish hung heavy with the ghosts of forgotten rains, the kind that seeped into cracked foundations and unearthed secrets long buried under layers of deliberate neglect. Beneath the old courthouse, a relic of antebellum grandeur with its peeling white paint and sagging verandas, workers stumbled upon a cache of archives that time had mercifully tried to erase. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light piercing through boarded windows, illuminating ink-faded pages that bore witness to an abomination. Over 200 enslaved individuals, their lives catalogued in cold precision, carrying the surnames of Louisiana's elite Creole families. Duprey, Beaumont, Desoyer. These were not mere labels, they were keys to opulent ballrooms in New Orleans, to seats of influence in Baton Rouge's legislative chambers, to the very fabric of Southern aristocracy. Yet here they were, scrawled beside words like slave, auction block, whip-scarred back, and prices that reduced human divinity to mere commerce. The discovery sent ripples through the Louisiana Historical Society like a stone cast into stagnant bayou waters, stirring up creatures best left undisturbed. Genealogists, those quiet guardians of lineage, pored over the brittle documents in dimly lit reading rooms, their fingers tracing names that blurred the line between oppressor and oppressed. But before the ink could fully reveal its horrors, three prominent families, descendants of those very surnames, descended with legal fury. Injunctions flew like ravens from courtrooms, cloaked in excuses of privacy violations, historical fabrications, and clerical blunders by uneducated scribes. The records vanished into sealed vaults, but not before whispers escaped. This was no mistake. It was a veil torn from a generational pact with darkness, a conspiracy where bloodlines intertwined in ways that mocked God's own design of justice and redemption. Imagine the weight of such a secret, carried like a millstone around the necks of the mighty. In the Bible, we read of sins of the fathers visited upon the sons, Exodus 20 verse 5, a divine ledger of retribution that spares no one. Here, in the humid heart of Louisiana, that scripture played out in flesh and blood, where the arrogance of plantation lords birthed a haunting legacy of guilt and unspoken atonement. The enslaved, branded with their masters' names, became living symbols of hypocrisy, mirrors reflecting the soul's decay. Was this divine irony? A cosmic judgment where the proud were humbled by the very chains they forged? As we delve into this tale, feel the spiritual chill, for in these bayou shadows, redemption whispered promises, but retribution roared like thunder. To surpass the veil of silence, we must journey back to the 1840s, where St. Martin Parish slumbered in a fevered dream of its own creation. This was no ordinary southern enclave, it was a labyrinth of cultural echoes, where French colonial ghosts mingled with Spanish whispers and Acadian resilience. The bayou country defied the stark binaries of the Deep South's cotton empires or Virginia's tobacco baronies. Here, society layered itself like the sediment in the Mississippi Delta, Acadians with their resilient folkways, French Creoles clinging to aristocratic pretensions, Spanish merchants weaving economic webs, and free people of color who navigated precarious freedoms with property deeds and business acumen. It was a fragile mosaic, held together by unspoken rules, where one wrong glance could shatter the illusion of civility. Bayou Teche, that serpentine artery of life and mystery, snaked through the parish like a vein of dark velvet, its waters mirroring ancient cypress sentinels draped in shrouds of Spanish moss. The banks pulsed with the rhythm of sugar plantations, fortunes rising and falling with the harvest's sweet yield. 9 months a year, the air clung to your skin like a lover's regret, thick with humidity that blurred horizons and muffled cries. During grinding season, the scent of molasses hung sweet and cloying, a deceptive perfume masking the sweat and sorrow beneath. In summer, the swamp exhaled earthy decay, alive with the buzz of insects and the distant croak of gators, nature's own choir of lament. This land revered Catholic saints as much as crop cycles, feast days like All Souls interrupted the toil, candles flickering in chapels where prayers for the dead mingled with pleas for mercy. Old colonial laws lingered like stubborn vines, sometimes overriding the brash American statutes that sought to impose order on this chaotic Eden. It was a place where French rolled off tongues as naturally as English, where the confessional booth held more power than the courtroom, and where sins, both mortal and venial, were buried deep in the fertile soil, only to sprout in unexpected ways. At the heart of this enigmatic world stood the Desoyer Plantation, a sprawling 3,000-acre kingdom of sugarcane that whispered promises of wealth and whispered curses of damnation. Émile Desoyer, the patriarch, had inherited this domain through a tangled web of family lines tracing back to the original French land grants of the 1700s. He fancied himself a progressive soul, educated at the prestigious College of New Orleans, a voracious reader of agricultural treatises from Cuba's ingenios and Brazil's fazendas. His ledgers were impeccable, columns of figures marching like soldiers toward prosperity. Innovations in sugar milling gleamed in his mills, steam-powered crushers that groaned like awakening beasts, extracting liquid gold from the cane's fibrous heart. Émile's world extended beyond the fields. In New Orleans, his townhouse on Rue Royale hosted soirees where crystal chandeliers cast golden halos over powdered faces and silk gowns. But beneath this veneer of enlightenment lurked a shadow self, a man who wielded the whip of efficiency not just on crops, but on human lives. His neighbors, the Beaumonts to the north, with their manicured orchards heavy with pecans, and the Dupreys to the south, masters of indigo dyes that stained hands and histories alike, formed a trinity of influence. Their families intertwined like the Bayou's roots, wives exchanging calling cards at charity galas for orphan Creole children, sons dueling over honor in private academies, daughters debuting at balls where matches were made under the watchful eyes of chaperones. Summer fevers drove them all to the city, where Yellowjack lurked in the humid alleys, sparing no class. There, in the cool marble of St. Louis Cathedral, they knelt for requiem masses, incense curling like prayers for absolution. The cathedral's bells told a solemn rhythm, echoing the heartbeat of a society built on fragile piety. Yet back in St. Martin Parish, in the dim plantation offices lit by flickering whale oil lamps and the parish courthouses with their creaking wooden floors, a perversion unfolded in silence. A secret so profound it warped the very air, charging it with unspoken dread. On the Desoyer lands lived Jean-Baptiste Desoyer, not a distant cousin, but an enslaved man born in 1814 under the same roof beams that sheltered Émile's ancestors. His mother, Marie Desoyer, had entered the world there in 1789, her cries echoing through quarters where the walls absorbed generations of muffled sobs. Jean-Baptiste was no field hand, he was the head cooper, his hands calloused from shaping oak staves into barrels that held the plantation's lifeblood. During harvest, the air thrummed with the mallet's rhythmic thud, each strike a testament to skill passed down like a sacred rite. His father had taught him the curve of the hoop, the seal of the bung, knowledge as vital as breath in this sugar-soaked world. But the name, Desoyer, it hung over him like a crown of thorns, a biblical emblem of inherited sin. In the quarters, under the moon's judgmental gaze, Jean-Baptiste gathered his wife Marguerite and their 3 children around a meager fire. The flames danced shadows on mud-daubed walls, illuminating faces etched with quiet defiance. He whispered stories of origins, tales of a great-grandmother brought from Senegal's shores, her spirit unbroken even as chains bound her body. Yet somehow, through unions forced or forbidden, the master's name had seeped into their bloodline, a mark of Cain that both cursed and empowered. Across the bayou, the Beaumont plantation echoed this eerie duplication. Pierre Beaumont, enslaved yet bearing the name like a stolen heirloom, led a family of 7, wife Catherine, whose eyes held the depth of unshed oceans, and 5 children whose laughter in stolen moments defied the overseer's glare. They traced their surname through 3 generations, each baptism in the parish church a quiet act of reclamation. Father Rousseau, the stoic priest with his threadbare cassock and ink-stained fingers, recorded it all without flinching. His quill scratched across vellum, capturing marriages under starlit skies, deaths from fever's cruel embrace, births where tiny fists clenched against injustice. Did Father Rousseau know? His confessional heard the planter's murmured sins, pride, lust, greed, absolving them with Latin incantations. But for the enslaved, his silence was a shield, or perhaps a complicity. In Proverbs 17 verse 15, it warns, "He who justifies the wicked and he who condemns the righteous are both alike an abomination to the Lord." Was the priest walking that razor's edge, baptizing with names that screamed of divine discord? The enslaved knew, in their spirituals sung low during Sunday respites, they wove psalms of deliverance, voices harmonizing like a choir of angels demanding justice. On the Duprey estate, the pattern amplified, 12 souls across 2 lineages, all Duprey in name, all chained in body. They gathered in hidden clearings, where fireflies mimicked heavenly lights, sharing bread and burdens. These families, Desoyer, Beaumont, Duprey, and others like Landry and Thibodeau, formed invisible kinships, surnames linking them across fences like threads in a divine tapestry. In the big houses, crystal decanters clinked in toasts to prosperity, while in the quarters, clay cups passed stories of resistance. The White family's perfected oblivion, Emile addressed Jean-Baptiste as Cooper, erasing the shared name and ledgers, reducing him to function. At New Orleans gatherings, amid swirling waltzes and champagne bubbles, any whisper of the anomaly was deflected, a colonial quirk, they'd murmur, eyes averted, hearts pounding with unspoken fear. This pretense was a spiritual fortress, walls built from denial and scripture twisted to suit. The planters quoted Ephesians 6 verse 5, "Slaves, obey your earthly masters," ignoring the verse's call for mutual respect. But the enslaved drew from Exodus, dreaming of a Moses to part their Bayou seas. Guilt festered like untreated wounds, manifesting in nightmares where ancestors rose from graves, fingers pointing in accusation. Redemption seemed distant, a flickering candle in the storm. Yet the surface cracked when an outsider pierced the veil. In June 1847, under a sky heavy with impending rain, Charles Porter arrived in St. Martinville. A 26-year-old lawyer from Massachusetts, sent by Boston abolitionists, he carried the fire of righteousness but the naivety of a northerner blind to southern subtleties. His hotel room smelled of mildew and faded lavender, its window overlooking a town square where oaks whispered secrets to the wind. Porter dove into courthouse records, his spectacles fogging in the heat, copying deeds with a fervor born of moral outrage. He sought proof of free people of color ensnared by fraud, but unearthed instead the surname enigma, enslaved bearing elite names, generations deep. To his Yankee mind, this screamed illegality, destroyed freedom papers, corrupted courts. Wrong, yet his error ignited a firestorm. He interviewed free Creoles in shaded verandas, their fans fluttering like nervous birds, answers evasive as swamp mists. Local customs, monsieur, they'd say, eyes darting. Father Rousseau met him in the rectory, sunlight slanting through stained glass depicting saints in agony. Porter laid out copies, voice trembling with conviction. "Father, this is bondage of the free. Generations held against God's law." The priest's face, lined like ancient parchment, remained stoic. "Louisiana's history is a Gordian knot, young man. Untangle it at your peril." His accent, thick as rue, carried warning. But Porter persisted, venturing to plantations on horseback, mud splattering his boots, determination steeling his spine. At Desoyer's gate, his card requested discourse on parish anomalies. Emile's hand trembled as he read it, the paper crumpling slightly. Summoning neighbors, Beaumont, Duprey, and 3 more, they convened in his study, a sanctum of leather-bound tomes and cigar smoke. Maps of estates covered walls, but the real territory was the soul's dark corners. As brandy swirled in snifters, voices rose in hushed urgency. "This meddler threatens everything," Emile growled, firelight casting demonic shadows. "Our names, our legacies, tainted." The air thickened with conspiracy, plans hatching like serpents' eggs. Outside, thunder rumbled, as if heaven itself disapproved. Porter's intrusion stirred the pot of divine retribution, where sins long buried demanded reckoning. The enslaved, sensing the shift in the wind, whispered prayers for deliverance. Marguerite clutched a rosary carved from cypress, beads worn smooth by hope. Jean-Baptiste, hammering barrels, felt a spiritual quickening, perhaps this was the sign, the parting of ways. But the planter's response was swift, a web of influence spun from legislative ties and sheriff's badges. Porter found doors slamming, informants vanishing into the swamp. One night, as lightning etched the sky, a warning note appeared under his door: leave, or join the ghosts. Fear gripped him, yet zeal burned brighter. He copied more records by candlelight, flames guttering like fragile faith. The crisis escalated, free Creoles distanced themselves, fearing backlash. In the cathedral's shadow, confessions multiplied, planters seeking absolution for unnamed sins. Spiritually, this was a crossroads, guilt's accumulation begging for redemption. Psalm 32 verses 3-5 spoke to it: "When I kept silent, my bones wasted away. Then I acknowledged my sin to you." But silence reigned, a dam holding back floods of truth. The enslaved families preserved their oral gospels, stories of African kings reduced to chattel, yet spirits unbroken. Children learned surnames as talismans, symbols of eventual justice. As tensions mounted, Porter's naivety cracked against reality. A midnight visit from masked riders, hooves thundering like apocalyptic horsemen, chased him from town. He fled to New Orleans, bundles of copies clutched like sacred scrolls. There, abolitionist networks amplified the whispers, but Louisiana's elite countered with lawsuits and smears. The records? Sealed, but echoes lingered. In the Bayou's eternal cycle, seasons turned, but the spiritual undercurrent persisted. Jean-Baptiste's sons grew, learning cooperage and caution, names etched in their hearts like divine brands. Emile aged, haunted by reflections in the Bayou. Was that his face, or Jean-Baptiste's? Redemption eluded, retribution loomed. This secret, buried yet breathing, foreshadowed a greater unveiling. In 1998's discovery, it resurfaced like a biblical flood, washing away pretenses. Families sued, but truth, like light, pierced darkness. Genealogists, modern prophets, pieced together DNA threads, confirming blood ties, masters and slaves, siblings in sin. Spiritually chilling, divine justice delayed, not denied. In these names, echoes of Job's trials, or suffering forged faith. The enslaved, bearing crosses of nomenclature, embodied resilience. Their legacy? A haunting reminder that sin's shadows lengthen, but redemption's dawn breaks inevitable. The evening air in Emile Desoyer's study thickened like molasses, heavy with the scent of aged leather and the sharp tang of brandy swirling in crystal snifters. Tobacco smoke curled lazily from half-smoked cigars, veiling the faces of 6 men, planters all, bound by bloodlines and buried secrets. They gathered not in comfort, but in urgency, circling Emile's mahogany desk like sentinels guarding a forbidden tomb. Ledgers sprawled open, their pages yellowed with accounts of harvests and human cargo, but tonight, the numbers blurred into irrelevance. At the center lay Charles Porter's visiting card, its crisp edges a stark intrusion from a world beyond their Bayou fortress. The men spoke in rapid French, voices low and edged with the rhythm of conspiracy, each word a brick in the wall of their shared deception. "He believes he's uncovered illegally enslaved free people," Jacques Duprey murmured, his fingers tracing the card's embossed letters as if they were runes of doom. His eyes, shadowed under heavy brows, flicked to the others, seeking confirmation in their grim nods. François Beaumont leaned against a bookshelf lined with agricultural journals from distant lands, his posture rigid, betraying the storm beneath his composed facade. "He comprehends nothing of what he truly beholds," François replied, his tone laced with disdain, yet undercut by a tremor of fear. "Then we must ensure his ignorance endures," Emile declared, his voice a gravelly anchor in the tense room. 50 years, half a century of meticulous arrangement, teetered on the brink because of this idealistic intruder from the frozen north. The arrangement. The word hung unspoken, a spectral presence in the room, heavier than the humid night pressing against the shuttered windows. None dared voice it fully, even here, in this sanctum of privilege. But each man knew those surnames, Desoyer, Beaumont, Duprey, etched into church ledgers beside the enslaved, were no clerical whims. They were echoes of blood ties, remnants of colonial indulgences where masters sired children in shadows, granting names as tokens of fleeting conscience. Yet, in the quarters, those names persisted like stubborn roots in swamp soil, clung to with fierce determination by the very souls they bound. The planters had mastered the art of erasure, omitting surnames from plantation books, referring to men like Jean-Baptiste as mere cooper or field hand, while permitting them in baptismal records, hidden in plain sight. Why? Because to acknowledge was to unravel, to deny was to preserve the fragile empire built on sin. In the Bible, Proverbs 28 verse 13 warns, "Whoever conceals his transgressions will not prosper, but he who confesses and forsakes them will obtain mercy." These men, pillars of Creole society, concealed with practiced piety, attending masses where incense masked the rot of their souls. Divine retribution loomed in their minds like distant thunder over the Teche, a judgment deferred, but inevitable. Emile broke the silence with resolve. "We alert the sheriff, Porter trespasses, sows discord among the enslaved. Demand he be escorted to the parish line, warned never to return." His words carried the weight of authority, forged in legislative halls where such men pulled strings like puppeteers. "The records are public," Jacques countered softly, but his twisted reading in flames. François nodded, his glass clinking against the desk. "And the church books?" Suggest to Father Rousseau that future entries generalize surnames. 4. Clarity. Agreement rippled through the group, a pact sealed in whispers. They'd honed this strategy over generations: hide the truth in visibility, divert eyes from probing too deep. As they dispersed into the night, carriage wheels crunching gravel under a moon veiled in moss-draped branches, the bayou seemed to sigh in complicity, waters lapping secrets into eternity. 3 days later, under a sky bruised with impending rain, Sheriff LeBlanc met Porter at the parish boundary. The road stretched east like a vein toward Mississippi, flanked by cypress knees rising like accusing fingers from the muck. The exchange was courteous, laced with southern velvet over steel. "Your inquiries stir unrest, Mr. Porter," the sheriff drawled, his badge glinting in the dim light. "Misunderstandings of our laws, dangerous." Porter, face flushed with righteous indignation, argued vehemently, evidence of fraud, surnames screaming injustice. He invoked his Boston society, threatened exposés. LeBlanc listened with patient eyes, then gestured to the road. "For your safety, sir." Emphasis hung on safety like a noose. Porter departed, but not in defeat. From a New Orleans inn, quill scratching furiously by candlelight, he dispatched a voluminous report northward, copies of records appended, his theory of stolen freedoms articulated in fervent prose. The Abolitionist Society seized it, publishing excerpts in their broadsheet, where it mingled with tales of whippings and auctions. Yet, to Northern readers jaded by slavery's broader horrors, the surname anomaly faded like ink in rain, a footnote in an epic of iniquity. In St. Martin Parish, equilibrium resumed its deceptive calm. Planters exhaled, tensions easing like receding floodwaters. Porter's folly dissolved into abolitionist echoes, their secret cocooned beneath his misconceptions. But in the quarters, embers stirred. Word traveled on invisible currents, from town workers to field hands, whispers carried on the wind like spirituals at dusk. Jean-Baptiste Desoyer learned of the Bostonian's queries during a rare respite, his hammer paused mid-strike on a barrel stave. The name Desoyer, his name, had pierced the veil, drawing eyes from afar. On a languid Sunday afternoon, sunlight filtering through Spanish moss like fragmented halos, enslaved from neighboring plantations converged near the bayou's edge. Fishing poles dipped lazily into dark waters, a facade for forbidden communion. Jean-Baptiste, Pierre Beaumont, and Louis Duprey, patriarchs of their shadowed lineages, claimed logs as thrones, voices hushed against overseer ears. The air hummed with insects, scented with wild jasmine and underlying decay. "The Boston man believed our names meant freedom stolen," Louis murmured, eyes on the rippling surface where fish shadows danced like elusive truths. Pierre shook his head, lines etching deeper in his weathered face. He grasped not. The names signify something else. Jean-Baptiste stared at his line, the bobber drifting like forgotten promises. "My grandfather whispered tales before fever claimed him. We bear these names for purpose," he said. "Remember, pass them, wait." Wait for what? The question echoed in Louis's gaze, unanswered. These fragments, oral relics passed through chains, blurred with time's erosion. Elders from the 1780s, voices frail as parchment, spoke of colonial shadows, laws under French and Spanish crowns, promises fractured when Americans seized the land. Hopeful myths intertwined with trauma, sustaining spirits and psalm-like endurance. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," Psalm 23 verse 1, even in valleys of shadow. Unbeknownst to them, the truth festered in the big houses, a deliberate obfuscation spanning decades. Those surnames weren't bastard echoes or scribal slips, they rooted in legal soil, once fertile under Code Noir, where natural children claimed status, names a bridge to partial humanity. But the planters, guardians of this poison fruit, buried it deep, lest it sprout claims to liberty. Years unfurled like cane leaves in the wind. Porter vanished into northern mists, his report resurfacing sporadically in pamphlets that yellowed unread. The families perpetuated their charade, surnames vanished from ledgers, persisted in church annals perused by few. Life pulsed in rhythmic cycles, planting under relentless sun, harvest moons illuminating grinding mills roar, summers fleeing to New Orleans' opulent refuges where fevers lurk like divine plagues. Births in dim cabins, deaths under weeping willows, all tallied in prophet's cold arithmetic. Yet the 1850s brewed unrest, a spiritual tempest gathering force. National fractures deepened, slavery's tendrils snaking into new territories, Compromise of 1850, a fragile bandage ripped by Kansas-Nebraska's blade in 1854. Planters scan newspapers by lamplight, brows furrowed, sensing the system's foundations cracking like parched earth. In Isaiah 59 verses 7-8, it thunders, their feet run to evil. The way of peace they do not know. These men, architects of inequity, felt the prophetic weight, guilt gnawing like termites in their souls' timbers. Then, in 1856, fate, or providence, intervened. Philippe Desoyer, Émile's eldest, returned from Paris's gilded halls. At 23, he embodied continental polish, tailored coats whispering of boulevards, minds sharpened on legal tones and rational philosophies. Sent for education and trade ties, he absorbed more, a passion for colonial jurisprudence, the ghosts of empires past. Back on the Bayou, he immersed in reacclimation, strolling fields where cane swayed like supplicants, poring over Émile's meticulous records in the plantation office, a detached structure of weathered cypress, its air musty with ink and dust. One sweltering July afternoon, humidity cloaking him like a shroud, Philippe unearthed a metal strongbox from a cabinet steps. Locked, yet key dangled nearby, forgotten, not concealed. Inside, relics from the 1780s to 1790s, French scripted parchments, property deeds brittle as autumn leaves, dowry packs, mercantile bonds. Routine, until a 1791 document halted his breath, a manumission decree, freeing Marie, mulatresse of the Desoyer household. Signed by great-great-grandfather Etienne, countersigned by a Spanish official, for Spain ruled then, their Code Noir a labyrinth of conditional mercies. Crucially, no registration mark adorned it. Philippe, versed in colonial edicts, knew validity demanded filing with New Orleans Cabildo. This lay dormant, a promise unfulfilled. The text extended liberty to Marie's progeny, born or unborn, naming sons Jean and Baptiste Desoyer. Calculations raced, descendants now span generations, threading to Jean-Baptiste, the cooper whose hammers echoed daily. Under this decree, they all, should breathe free air. Deeper in the box, 3 more unregistered manumissions mirrored the pattern, freedoms granted to household women, children acknowledged with surnames, signatures bold yet filings absent. Beneath, a 1803 letter from Etienne to his son, Philippe's great-grandfather, post-Louisiana Purchase. The script, elegant as a confessional veil, unfolded revelations. These arrangements, legal under Spanish sway and Code Noir, honored natural children's surnames and statuses. Yet Americans impose rigid binaries, intolerant of our nuances. I withhold registration, the women agreed, their offspring raised here, skilled, cared for. Legal freedom invites perils for free people of color amid rising suspicions. They retain our name by blood right, remain under our aegis for safeguarding. Practicality dictates, stability may permit future filing. Uphold this. Philippe reread, hands trembling, the room spinning in moral vertigo. Rationalizations crumbled, this was no benevolence, but betrayal, freedoms signed, then pocketed for practicality. Sin cloaked in protection, echoing Judas's kiss, 30 pieces of silver for souls. Jean-Baptiste, descendant direct, enslaved lifelong with kin, when liberty's ink demanded otherwise. Guilt surged like Bayou floodwaters, spiritual reckoning crashing, for what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? Mark 8 verse 36. The strongbox, a Pandora's vessel, unleashed truths long entombed. Outside, the Bayou murmured, waters bearing witness to generations' tears. Enslaved families, unwitting heirs to stolen freedoms, preserved names as sacred relics, talismans of redemption deferred. Philippe, custodian of this damning legacy, faced a crossroads, bury anew, or confront the divine ledger? The air grew heavier, charged with impending judgment, as ancestral ghosts stirred in the gathering dusk. In this revelation, biblical parallels deepened, like Pharaoh hardening his heart against Moses' pleas, the Desoyers chose bondage over Exodus. Yet seeds of atonement sprouted, Philippe's discovery a potential key to chains. The enslaved, bearing names like brands of Cain, embodied resilience, their oral histories songs of perseverance. Divine justice, patient as the Mississippi's flow, circled closer, retribution's whisper growing to a roar. The parish slumbered unaware, but tension simmered, a spiritual cauldron bubbling toward boil. Émile, aging under prosperity's weight, sensed shadows lengthening. Nightmares plagued him, faces in mirrors morphing to Jean-Baptiste's, accusing eyes reflecting shared blood. Redemption beckoned, yet pride barred the path. In the quarters, Marguerite prayed over rosary beads, visions of liberty. Flickering like fireflies. Children learned name's power, whispers of weight turning to embers of action. This unearthing, partial light on buried sins, foreshadowed greater unveilings. In 1998's courthouse cache, echoes resounded, injunctions failing against truth's tide. Genealogists traced DNA like divine threads, confirming kinships twisted by greed. Spiritually haunting, sins of fathers, as Numbers 14:18 decrees, visiting iniquity upon children. Yet in exposure lay hope, redemption's dawn-piercing guilt's gloom. Twilight descended upon the Desoyer Plantation office like a shroud, the fading sun casting elongated shadows across dusty ledgers and forgotten corners. Philippe sat amid the relics of deception, the metal strongbox open before him like Pandora's curse, its contents spilling forth papers that reeked of aged ink and moral decay. The air hung stale, laced with the faint mustiness of parchment and the distant hum of cicadas heralding night's approach. His hands, still bearing the softness of Parisian salons, trembled as he traced the signatures, Etienne Desoyer's bold flourish, a Spanish official's indifferent scrawl. These were not mere documents, they were indictments, testaments to freedoms promised and pilfered, generations bound by a patriarch's practical calculus. Legal ramifications swirled in Philippe's mind like Bayou mists, under the lingering echoes of Spanish Code Noir. These manumissions should have blossomed into liberty for Marie and her descendants. Yet, unfiled, they withered into oblivion, rendered void by American rigidity. Morally, the weight crushed him, his family's opulence, the crystal chandeliers of their New Orleans townhouse, his own enlightened education amid the Sorbonne's hallowed halls, all erected on the sweat of souls who, by right, should have walked free. Practically, in 1856 Louisiana, rectification seemed a fool's errand, a society teetering on slavery's brink, where any whisper of colonial claims could ignite lawsuits like wildfires through dry cane fields. He envisioned chaos, enslaved across the state pouring over archives, demanding justice, unraveling the fragile tapestry of property and power. That evening, under the study's gas lamps flickering like uneasy consciences, Philippe confronted Emile. The strongbox thudded onto the desk, a judgment stone. Emile's face, lined with years of calculated oversight, cycled through feigned surprise to weary acknowledgement, settling into resignation. "You knew," Philippe stated, his voice steady but laced with betrayal, not accusation. Emile latched the box with deliberate care, as if sealing away a demon. "I suspected arrangements from the old days. My father alluded once, complications from French and Spanish eras, best undisturbed. I chose ignorance, wisdom, I thought. But father, these souls, Jean-Baptiste, his kin, they deserve freedom. By these papers, by colonial decree." Philippe's words trailed, invoking a law eclipsed by time. Emile's gaze hardened, steel forged in legislative battles. Colonial shadows hold no sway under American stars. Unfiled, their ghosts, legally null. Even honoring them now. He rose, pacing to the window where moonlight silvered the quarter's humble cabins, smoke curling from chimneys like prayers ascending. In those dwellings, Jean-Baptiste and family supped on meager cornmeal, unaware their chains were forged from stolen liberty. Emile turned, eyes reflecting the fire's glow like embers of suppressed guilt. Free them? Unleash pandemonium. Every colonial tie scrutinized, claims flooding courts, our state's foundation crumbling. We uphold an untenable wrong because reversal invites apocalypse, not just our ruin, but society's. His words echoed Ecclesiastes 10 verse 8, "He who digs a pit will fall into it," a biblical trap these planters had excavated themselves. Philippe saw the spiritual abyss, sin compounded, redemption deferred, divine justice biting like a storm over the Gulf. 2 months later, Philippe sailed for France, ostensibly for further studies. But father and son knew the truth, flight from a heritage tainted, a conscience scorched by knowledge. Emile reinstated the strongbox in its shadowy nook, key dangling like a noose unused. The pretense endured, surnames whispered in quarters, erased in ledgers, a dance of denial under heaven's watchful eye. Had fate sealed the secret there, it might have perished in the Civil War's inferno, ashes scattered in Reconstruction's winds. But profound sins, like weeds in fertile soil, resurface when structures crumble. Divine providence, perhaps, or retribution's inexorable pull, as in Jeremiah 23 verse 12, their way shall be to them like slippery paths in the darkness. The war erupted, a cataclysm of blood and fire, reaching Louisiana in 1862 with Union's iron grip on New Orleans. St. Martin Parish clung to Confederate illusions for another year, but Union's shadow loomed, 100 miles distant yet omnipresent. Enslaved communities buzzed with clandestine knowledge, escapes to Union lines, contraband status granting liberty. Planters fortified patrols, muffled news like sins in confessionals, but whispers permeated like Bayou fog. By late 1862, quarters hummed with tales, bluecoats in the Crescent City, freedom's beacon for those daring the trek. For French surnamed families, dilemma steepened: risk flight through hostile lands, or await war's verdict? Jean-Baptiste Desoyer, now 58, hands gnarled by arthritis like twisted cypress roots, yielded barrel-making to son Antoine, 32, whose young family, wife and 3 children, amplified perils. Journeys hazards, swamps teeming with gators and patrols, children whimpering in night marches, uncertain reception at lines. Yet staying chained amid crumbling bonds mocked their enduring names. Tension festered in quarters like untreated fever, debates in moonlight huddles, voices clashing, bold youth urging exodus, elders preaching patience. Spiritual undercurrents surged, psalms recited low, invoking Exodus 14 verse 14, "The Lord will fight for you, you need only to be still." But stillness chafed against injustice's yoke. Complexity mounted in May 1863, Emil's sudden stroke felled him, a divine stroke perhaps, body crumpling like his empire's facade. Widow gone 2 years prior, inheritance fell to sons, Philippe absent in France, Henri slain at Shiloh's bloody fields. Plantation defaulted to nephew Victor Pichon, 35, a pragmatic outsider from Assumption Parish, viewing Desoyer lands as ledger lines, not legacies. Victor's scrutiny pierced the veil, reviewing records by candlelight, surnames leaped out, matching parish elites, an anomaly dismissed by Emile but now irksome. Paperwork folly, he deemed, decreeing, henceforth, first names only, descriptors for transactions. Standard elsewhere, but here it severed colonial threads preserved like sacred relics. Word rippled through quarters like a chill wind. Jean-Baptiste, forging barrels with labored strikes, felt a fracture in his soul. The name Desoyer, generational anchor, whispered talisman of unspoken rights, faced erasure. Taught to children as identity's core, it linked to foggy tales of old papers, freedoms hinted but unrealized. To lose it now, as war teased liberty, was spiritual desecration, akin to stripping altars in a chapel. In unprecedented defiance, Jean-Baptiste sought audience with Victor. Overseer balked, enslaved didn't request, but curiosity granted entry. In the office, same sanctum where Philippe unearthed truths, Jean-Baptiste stood, hat clutched, posture deferential yet unbowed. Age-etched caution, memories of lashes for insolence, scars like maps of suffering. "M'sieu Pichon," he began, voice steady as a mallet's rhythm, "I hear of name changes in books. Might my family keep Desoyer?" "Generations carried it, sir." Victor, Quill paused, regarded him with puzzlement. "Ledgers matter not, you know your kin. Administrative trifles." But Jean-Baptiste persisted, eyes holding a depth of ancestral resolve. "Name signifies, sir. Grandfather's grandfather bore it, my young uns do. It's our essence." Irritation flared in Victor, "Names as I decree." Presumptuous prattle, depart. Yet Jean-Baptiste anchored, desperation birthing risk. "Sir, respectfully, old papers exist. From French times, about the name, our line." Victor's gaze sharpened, curiosity edged with alarm. "Papers? Elaborate." "Calculated gamble, freedoms hinted, sir." "Stories past, name for reason." "Thought perhaps you knew, why it lingered." Dismissed, Jean-Baptiste retreated, heart pounding like war drums. Victor ransacked the office, drawers yanked, shelves scoured, but strongbox eluded, hidden in obscurity. Unsettled, he penned François Beaumont, querying surname origins. Response, urgent summons. At Beaumont's, Victor faced 5 elders, guardians of the secret, Emile's confidants. Explanation veiled, colonial complications, surnames tolerated for historical peace. Probe no further, stories mere folklore, not claims. But if documents exist? Victor pressed. None, Jacques Duprey asserted, tone final as a gavel. rumors, delusions of the oppressed. Decades of equilibrium, disturb not. Victor withdrew, dissatisfied yet cowed. Policy stood, but enforcement lax, surnames lingered in ink, Jean-Baptiste in toil, risks outcome nebulous. Confederacy's demise accelerated, April 1863, Vicksburg's fall secured Mississippi, encircling St. Martin. Confederate grip dissolved like mist at dawn. By June, Union boots trod St. Martinville, freedom's clarion. Chaos ensued, some planters bartered wages for labor retention, others fled westward, abandoning empires. Freedmen confronted voids, no land, scant coin, freedom's promise hollow as empty cabins. For surname bearers, emancipation bittersweet, names preserved through peril, now badges of resilience. Yet spiritual reckoning persisted, sins exposed, redemption incomplete. In biblical echo, like the Israelites post-Exodus, wilderness awaited, manna scarce, promised land distant. Bayou winds carried laments, but also hymns of hope. In quarters turned homesteads, families gathered under stars, stories evolving from whispers to declarations. Jean-Baptiste, frailty deepening, beheld grandchildren unchained, name intact as divine inheritance. Antoine forged not barrels, but futures, perhaps sharecropping, or migration north. Planter's world shattered, Victor vanished amid turmoil, strongboxes' secrets scattering like leaves in gale. Philippe, from France's safety, learned via delayed missives, plantation lost, truths irrelevant in war's maw. Yet legacy haunted, 1998's unearthed archives revived ghosts, families suing to bury anew. Genealogists wove DNA tapestries, confirming blood's twisted bonds. Spiritually chilling, as Romans 2 verse 5 warns, storing up wrath for yourself on the day of wrath. Sin's harvest ripened, divine justice inexorable. Transition fractured, yet resilient spirits endured. Free people navigated Reconstruction's thorns, black codes, vigilantes like spectral overseers. Churches rose from cabins, spirituals evolving to freedom songs. Surnames, Desoyer, Beaumont, Duprey, became emblems of triumph, markers of blood-bought deer. In Bayou's eternal murmur, echoes lingered, guilt's specters in big houses ruined, redemption's light in quarters reborn. War's fury unearthed not just freedoms, but soul's depths, a testament to endurance, a caution against sin's chains. The heat of June 1865 pressed down on St. Martin Parish like the hand of judgment itself, the air thick with the scent of ripening cane and the metallic tang of freedom newly declared. Union soldiers, dust-caked and resolute, rode up the long oak-lined drive to the Desoyer plantation. Captain Miller, an Ohio man with eyes hardened by war, dismounted before Victor Pichon, who stood rigid on the veranda, his face pale beneath the brim of his hat. The officer's voice carried across the yard like a proclamation from on high, by order of the United States military, all persons held in bondage on this property are hereby emancipated. You may offer wages for continued labor, but no man, woman, or child may be compelled to remain. Victor's hands clenched at his sides, but he said nothing. The words hung in the humid air, rippling outward like stones cast into the Teche's dark waters. In the quarters, the news spread faster than wildfire through dry grass, whispers turning to shouts, tears mingling with laughter, prayers rising like incense from every doorway. Jean-Baptiste Desoyer, now 61, his once strong hands knotted with arthritis, gathered his kin beneath the ancient live oaks that had witnessed generations of suffering. 3 generations stood there, his wife Marguerite, their 5 grown children with spouses and 8 grandchildren clinging to skirts and pant legs. From neighboring plantations came representatives of the Beaumonts and Dupreys, families bound by the same shadowed surnames, the same unspoken history. They formed a circle under the dappled shade, the Spanish moss swaying gently as if in reverence. Antoine, Jean-Baptiste's eldest son, spoke first, voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. We're free. That's what matters now. We can walk away, to New Orleans, to the promised land grants the Union speaks of. A Beaumont man, broad-shouldered and scarred from years in the fields, shook his head. Free with what, brother? No coin in our pockets, no tools but our hands. And our names, he glanced at the others, the weight of the words settling over them like a shroud. Our names are still theirs. A black man calling himself Desoyer in this new world, how long before questions turned to threats? Silence fell, broken only by the distant call of a mourning dove. Jean-Baptiste stepped forward, his gaze sweeping the faces of his blood, faces that carried the same high cheekbones, the same quiet fire as the white family in the big house. "We keep the names," he said, each word deliberate, resonant. "These names are ours. We earned them through blood, through sweat, through generations of carrying them in silence. Whatever truth lies behind the old papers, the old laws, the names belong to us now. The white families pretended not to see us for 70 years. Let them pretend still. We will not change who we are to ease their conscience." A murmur rippled through the group, agreement, resolve, a quiet spiritual affirmation. In that moment, under the oaks that had shaded both enslavement and emancipation, they made their covenant. The surnames, Desoyer, Beaumont, Duprey, would endure, not as marks of shame, but as banners of endurance. As Psalm 135 verse 13 declares, "Your name, O Lord, endures forever, your renown, O Lord, throughout all ages." So too would these names, reclaimed from chains, stand as testimonies to a people who refused erasure. Across the parish, the decision echoed. When the Freedmen's Bureau began registering the newly emancipated, dozens of black families entered their French Creole surnames without hesitation. The clerks paused, brows furrowing at the familiar names, but the freed people stood firm. They claimed land, sought work, baptized children, all under names that once opened doors for the mighty and now proclaimed dignity for the oppressed. The crisis peaked in November 1865 when Philippe Desoyer finally returned. War had delayed him, blockade and battle lines had kept him in France until Union control of New Orleans allowed safe passage on a merchant vessel. He arrived to a transformed world. Victor Pichon fled to Texas, the big house under Union oversight, and the quarters led by Jean-Baptiste, now an elder statesman of the freed community. The two men met on the plantation office porch, no longer master and slave, but two souls bound by a shared, painful history. Philippe carried the strongbox, its metal cool against his palms, retrieved from hiding and carried across oceans in silent atonement. They sat in the late afternoon light, the bayous murmur a soft undertone. Philippe opened the box, spreading the yellowed manumission papers like sacred relics. "I found these in 1856, he said, voice low. "Manumissions from the 1790s. If filed properly, your great-great-grandfather would have been free, and you, born free. My family chose not to register them after the purchase. We profited from your labor, when we had no legal right." Jean-Baptiste studied the French script he could not read, yet the weight of the words settled in his bones. "My grandfather spoke of papers. Said our name meant something more than chains. I thought it might be hope dressed as history." Philippe met his gaze. "It was true. You should have been free for 70 years. A long silence stretched, heavy with the ghosts of generations. Then Jean-Baptiste asked, "Can they be filed now? Would it matter?" Philippe had consulted New Orleans lawyers. "The Emancipation Proclamation freed you regardless. But yes, these establish your family's right to the Desoyer name through blood and colonial law. They are evidence of wrong done." Jean-Baptiste's eyes softened. "Why tell me? Why give them?" Philippe's voice cracked. "Because truth demands it. Because my family owes yours a debt beyond repayment. And because your perseverance, carrying the name through every hardship, deserves to know it was justified." Philippe filed the documents with the Freedmen's Bureau and Louisiana authorities, accompanying them with depositions detailing his family's concealment. The act sparked brief scandal in legal circles, a white planter admitting systemic theft of freedom, but Reconstruction's chaos soon swallowed it. Violence, political upheaval, economic ruin dominated. The Desoyer case became one footnote among thousands. For the freed families, simplicity prevailed. They had their names, and proof that those names carried weight. Some remained in St. Martin Parish, laboring as sharecroppers or paid workers on familiar soil. Others journeyed to New Orleans, weaving into the vibrant tapestry of free people of color. Still others ventured north or west, Chicago, St. Louis, California, carrying surnames like torches into new worlds. Jean-Baptiste Desoyer stayed until 1868, working as a cooper, teaching grandchildren the craft and the stories. Before death claimed him, he gathered his descendants one final time, speaking of the strongbox, the manumissions, the names as divine inheritance. Philippe sold the plantation in 1867, directing proceeds to a modest fund for the freed Desoyers, inadequate recompense, yet acknowledgement. He spent his life in New Orleans, documenting colonial law's complexities, his writings becoming scholarly references, though few linked them to personal redemption. White families reacted variably, some ignored black bearers of their surnames, clinging to coincidence, others attempted name changes, failing against resolve, a few, following Philippe's example, offered quiet aid, always discreetly. As Reconstruction waned and white control reasserted, the story faded from public view. Oral traditions preserved fragments in communities lacking resources for documentation. By the early 1900s, with elders passing, details blurred, names remained, but the why grew hazy.